In 1903, nestled deep in the French countryside, there stood a mansion unlike any other. With its towering spires and elaborate architecture, it was a symbol of wealth, power, and legacy. But what lay beneath this opulent facade was far from the perfect world it appeared to be. The mansion was built upon something far darker. The bones of ancestors long forgotten, their deaths concealed in the name of ambition and greed. For years, this family thrived, their secrets buried deep within the mansion's foundations. As the years went by, whispers began to surface. Whispers of buried truths, of a family whose rise to power was anything but honorable. But who would dare uncover the truth? And more importantly, would the family's dark past come back to haunt them? The mansion still stands, its dark history waiting to be uncovered. What lies hidden beneath its walls? The year is 1903, and France stands at the threshold of modernity. The turn of the century has brought rapid industrialization, social upheaval, and a shifting political landscape. The rich continue to grow wealthier, while the working class struggles to make ends meet. It is within this backdrop that the mansion, built atop a grim foundation, tells a story of privilege and power. The family behind the mansion, the Charbonniers, have long been a fixture in French society. Their wealth was built on the backs of their ancestors, whose rise to prominence was marred by violence, betrayal, and an insatiable thirst for power. The mansion they built, a sprawling estate that took decades to complete, was not just a home, it was a symbol of their unshakable dominance. But the foundation of this grand structure was something far darker than stone and mortar. For generations, the Charbonnier family had secretly manipulated, deceived, and even killed to ensure their place at the top of the social hierarchy. As they expanded their empire, they saw no problem with using the land they owned to build a monument to themselves, no matter the cost. It was said that the bones of those who once lived on the land were not buried in proper graves, but rather, their remains were used to anchor the foundations of the mansion. The bones of slaves, peasants, and even family members who had fallen out of favor, all of them were concealed beneath the floors, forgotten by time, but forever bound to the estate. For years, the Charbonnier family lived in blissful ignorance of the horrors beneath their feet. The mansion stood as a testament to their greatness, while the rest of the world admired it from afar. But beneath the surface, something darker began to stir. The bones, it seemed, had not remained silent. Strange occurrences began to plague. The mansion objects moved on their own. Shadows seemed to shift in the corners of rooms, and whispers echoed in the night. Many attributed it to superstition or the house's age. But for those with a deeper understanding, it was clear that the mansion was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the dark history of the family that built it. As time passed, rumors spread, but the Charbonniers, with their wealth and power, were able to suppress any notion of scandal. Yet, even in their high towers, they could not escape the weight of their past. The Charbonnier family was led by its patriarch, René Charbonnier, a man who had built his wealth through ruthless ambition. With sharp features, a commanding presence, and a steely gaze, René was the embodiment of power. He carried himself with an air of authority, often making decisions that others dared not challenge. His success had come at a high cost, and beneath his stoic exterior lay a man burdened by the weight of his actions. René was a man who had learned early on that to maintain control, you had to be willing to sacrifice everything, including your own humanity. René's eldest son, Louis Charbonnier, followed closely in his father's footsteps. Tall, with the same dark eyes and angular jawline, Louis exuded the same charisma and coldness. However, unlike his father, he lacked René's ability to hide his emotions. There was a hunger in Louis that could not be ignored. It was a hunger that drove him to make decisions that would not only seal the family's future, but also ensure its downfall. His ambition was boundless, but so was his guilt, a guilt he buried deep inside, masked by his charm and arrogance. Then there was Clara Charbonnier, René's wife, who had been a quiet observer in the family's rise to power. Clara, with her soft-spoken demeanor and delicate features, was a woman who had long sacrificed her own desires for the good of her family. Despite her quiet nature, Clara carried a deep inner strength that she kept hidden from the world. Her role in the family was more than that of a mother and wife. She had been complicit in the family's darkest deeds, turning a blind eye to the growing skeletons in their closet. Clara had always known about the bones beneath the mansion, but she never dared to speak of them. The youngest of the family, Evelyn Charbonnier, had grown up with a sense of discomfort regarding the mansion's history. A rebellious spirit, Evelyn was drawn to uncovering the truth. She had spent much of her youth trying to understand the whispers that seemed to follow her family, especially regarding the mansion's eerie foundation. Evelyn had inherited her mother's quiet strength, but unlike Clara, she was unafraid to confront the family's past. Her growing suspicions made her the most dangerous of the Charbonniers, as she was the only one who dared to uncover the truth. Lastly, Pierre Charbonnier, the family's longtime butler, had served the Charbonniers for decades. With his quiet loyalty and stern face, Pierre knew more than anyone else about the family's darkest secrets. He had witnessed everything, the manipulations, the betrayals, and the quiet unraveling of a family bound by their own sins. Though Pierre remained silent for much of his life, he had his own plans for the future, plans that would challenge the very foundation of the Charbonnier legacy. As the years passed, the Charbonnier family's carefully crafted world began to show signs of unraveling. Despite the mansion's grandeur and the family's continued dominance in society, there was an undeniable unease that settled over them. It started with small things, odd noises at night, the sense that they were being watched, the strange feeling that the mansion itself was alive with whispers. But these were easily dismissed, chalked up to superstition, the natural aging of a house so grand, or the pressure of living in such a powerful family. But these occurrences weren't the only things causing discomfort within the Charbonnier walls. Evelyn, the youngest of the Charbonnier children, had always been the one to question the past. Unlike her brothers and parents, she didn't shy away from the rumors that followed their family's legacy. She had heard the whispers about the bones beneath the mansion, the story of how their ancestors' remains had been used to lay the foundation for the estate. The idea had haunted her since she was a child, and as she grew older, her suspicions only deepened. She had begun to investigate the family's past in secret, uncovering long-forgotten letters, hidden journals, and documents that pointed to a disturbing truth. One evening, while rummaging through the mansion's vast library, Evelyn stumbled upon an old family journal, one that hadn't been touched for decades. The words within it were chilling, a detailed account of the Charbonnier family's rise to power, filled with accounts of manipulation, betrayal, and violence. But it was the last entry that froze Evelyn in her tracks. It spoke of the bones beneath the mansion's foundation, the sacrifices made by the family to ensure their success. The journal detailed how René Charbonnier had orchestrated the removal of anyone who might stand in the family's way, including his own blood relatives. Evelyn knew this was the beginning of something much darker than she had imagined. But it wasn't just the past that haunted her, it was the present. As she began to piece together the history, strange things began to happen. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of power, now felt like a prison. The atmosphere became oppressive, the air thick with the weight of secrets. Evelyn's nights were filled with vivid dreams, visions of the long-dead ancestors whose remains lay beneath her feet. It became clear that the mansion was not just haunted by memories, it was haunted by guilt. The rest of the family, however, refused to acknowledge Evelyn's growing suspicions. René, still as commanding and stoic as ever, brushed off her concerns, dismissing them as nothing more than youthful imagination. Louis, too, laughed off Evelyn's findings, calling them baseless rumors. Even Clara, who had long known the truth, refused to speak of it. The Charbonnier family had become experts at hiding their secrets. too skilled to let anything, or anyone, threaten their carefully constructed world. But Evelyn wasn't so easily silenced. Determined to uncover the truth, she continued her investigation, uncovering the family's darkest deeds. What she discovered would shake the foundation of the mansion itself, and the very legacy of the Charbonnier name. As Evelyn dug deeper into the family's hidden history, the mansion seemed to grow darker with each passing day. The once grand halls, filled with portraits of the Charbonnier ancestors, now felt suffocating, as though the very walls were closing in on her. The whispers she'd heard as a child had turned into something more sinister. Muffled voices in the shadows, faint cries carried by the wind, and cold spots that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The mansion had become a living entity, feeding off the guilt and lies buried beneath its floors. Evelyn's late-night research had unearthed shocking secrets. She discovered letters that painted a gruesome picture of the family's ruthless climb to power. René had not only manipulated his business rivals, but had eliminated anyone who posed a threat to the family's dominance, including his own relatives. It became clear that the mansion was not just a symbol of wealth. It was a monument to their dark deeds. The bones beneath the mansion were not just the remains of peasants or slaves, but those of family members who had fallen out of favor, victims of René's insatiable hunger for control. As Evelyn connected the dots, she began to realize that the mansion's eerie occurrences were no mere coincidences. The spirits of those who had been sacrificed were restless, their souls trapped within the very foundation of the house. Evelyn's dreams grew more vivid, filled with anguished faces and cryptic messages. She began to see visions of the family's past, witnessing the murders and betrayals firsthand. It was as though the mansion itself was trying to communicate with her, urging her to uncover the truth. Despite the mounting evidence, Evelyn's family remained steadfast in their denial. René refused to acknowledge the existence of any wrongdoing, continuing to dismiss Evelyn's discoveries as nothing more than superstition. Louis, always the charming yet cold figure, was becoming increasingly agitated by his sister's investigations. He warned her to stop asking questions, warning her that some things were better left buried. Clara, ever the obedient wife, sided with her husband, insisting that Evelyn's obsession with the past was tearing the family apart. She had always known the truth, but speaking it aloud had always felt impossible. The shame was too great to bear. But Evelyn could not stop. With each new discovery, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. She began to suspect that Louis, too, was hiding something, a secret that tied him to the mansion's haunted history. His cold demeanor, his reluctance to speak of the past, all pointed to a man who had more to hide than he let on. Evelyn's suspicions grew stronger, and she knew that confronting her family was the only way forward. One evening, as the family gathered in the grand dining hall for a formal dinner, Evelyn decided it was time to confront them. She had found the final piece of the puzzle, a letter from René to his business partner, outlining his plans to bury the family's darkest secrets forever. The letter was dated years after the mansion's construction, suggesting that the legacy of bloodshed and manipulation had continued well into the 20th century. The truth was clear, and Evelyn could no longer stay silent. With the letter in hand, Evelyn stood before her family. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, the air thick with unspoken words. She looked at her father, her brother, and her mother. All of them were complicit in the lies that had held the family together. This was the moment of reckoning, the moment when everything would change. "Why have we kept these secrets?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "What have we become?" The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, the Charbonnier family was forced to confront the truth. They had spent their entire lives hiding. The silence in the dining hall was suffocating. Evelyn stood with the letter in hand, her fingers trembling slightly as the weight of the moment pressed upon her. Her eyes scanned the room, meeting each of her family members, and for the first time, She saw a flicker of something, guilt, fear. It was fleeting, but undeniable. Renee, who had always been the unshakable patriarch, appeared momentarily lost for words. Louis, usually the picture of composure, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Clara, her face pale and drawn, avoided Evelyn's gaze. "Why have we kept these secrets?" Evelyn repeated, her voice low but unwavering. "What have we become?" Renee finally broke the silence, his voice as cold as ice. "You don't understand, Evelyn. You never have. This family has always done what was necessary to survive." His words were laced with authority, but there was a tremor in them now, something he couldn't quite mask. But Evelyn was not deterred. Survive, by sacrificing those who stood in our way, by hiding bodies beneath the floors. Her voice rose with each word, the frustration and anger spilling out. "You think this mansion is a monument to our success, but it's nothing more than a tomb that holds our sins." Renee's face hardened, his usual control slipping. "Enough," he spat, rising from his seat. "You don't know what you're talking about." Evelyn stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. The room was thick with tension, the air vibrating with the weight of history that had been buried for so long. Evelyn took a deep breath, summoning the courage to push further. "If you truly think we're above reproach," she said slowly, "then why have we hidden the truth? Why does this house make us feel trapped?" She paused, staring at the mansion's grandiose walls. "I've seen the truth, Father. I've heard the voices of those who were wronged. They won't be silenced any longer." Louis, who had been eerily quiet up until this point, suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You need to stop. You're tearing this family apart," he warned, his tone sharp, almost pleading. "You don't know what you're doing." But Evelyn could see through his facade now. She had always admired her brother's polished exterior, but now she saw the cracks. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that he, too, was complicit, the fear that everything he had built his life on was a lie. Her heart sank as the realization hit her. Louis wasn't just part of the family legacy, he was entangled in it. He had always known the truth, just like their father, and he had hidden it just as deeply. The turning point wasn't just about revealing the family's dark past, it was about confronting the complicity that had been passed down through generations. Louis wasn't just guilty of ignoring the past, he had helped bury it. The tension reached a boiling point as Evelyn took another step forward, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You can't hide from this forever. The past is coming for us all." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving her family in stunned silence. This was the moment that would change everything. Evelyn had finally made her stand, and there was no turning back. The mansion's walls seemed to breathe with anticipation, as if they, too, were waiting for the truth to surface. The confrontation with her family had left Evelyn shaken but resolute. She had been prepared for resistance, for the anger and the denial. But what she hadn't expected was the overwhelming sense of isolation that followed. She had exposed the truth, yet the walls of the mansion felt more confining than ever. Every corner seemed to whisper of the past, and every shadow cast seemed to loom over her decisions. But she couldn't back down now. That night, she gathered her courage and made her way down into the mansion's basement, where the foundations lay, the heart of the family's buried secrets. The air was thick with an unnatural chill as she descended into the dimly lit cellar, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The weight of the mansion above her felt heavier now, as if it were pressing down with the accumulated guilt of generations. Evelyn knew this was where everything would come to a head as she reached the center of the basement. Evelyn stood before the spot where the bones of the family's past were said to be buried. She closed her eyes, feeling the coldness seep into her skin, as if the very earth beneath her was alive with the pain of those long forgotten The whispers that had followed her now seemed to crescendo, becoming clearer, more desperate. Suddenly, a creaking sound broke through the silence, a door opening in the distance. Evelyn turned sharply, heart racing. Was it her family coming to stop her, or something far worse? Before she could react, a shadow appeared at the far end of the basement. It was Louis, his face pale and drawn. He had followed her, though she hadn't heard him approach. "You're making a mistake, Evelyn," Louis said softly, his voice almost pleading. "You don't know what you're doing. This isn't just about the mansion. It's about everything we've built." Evelyn took a step back, realizing for the first time that Louis wasn't just protecting the family's legacy, he was protecting himself. He had been complicit, just as much as Renee, and his fear was not just about the truth coming to light, but about the consequences it would have on him. "You've known the truth all along, haven't you?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You're not just part of this family's darkness. You've been a part of the cover-up, Louis." Louis didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, closer to the spot where the bones were hidden. The realization hit Evelyn like a thunderclap. Her brother wasn't just a bystander. He had been instrumental in ensuring that the family's darkest secret remained buried. But as Louis reached for the ground, something shifted in the room, a crack in the wall, the faintest of noises, as if the mansion itself was reacting. And then, the earth shifted beneath their feet. The room seemed to hold its breath as the earth beneath Evelyn and Louis shifted. A deep, rumbling sound echoed through the mansion, followed by a sharp crack from the walls. The ground beneath their feet trembled, as if the mansion itself was waking from a long, deep slumber. Evelyn felt the air grow colder, and for a moment, it felt like the mansion was alive, alive with the pain of the past, alive with the guilt of those who had built it on the bones of others. Louis stumbled back, his face a mask of terror. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the strange noises reverberating through the basement. Evelyn took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the spot where the bones were buried. The mansion's secrets had begun to bleed into the present, and there was no turning back. The ground had shifted in a way that seemed to beckon them toward the truth. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Without warning, the floor beneath them cracked open, revealing the remains that had been buried for so long. Bones, charred and brittle, lay in the earth, their whiteness stark against the dark soil. The air grew thick with an otherworldly energy, and the whispers that had plagued Evelyn her entire life seemed to swell around them, filling the basement with a suffocating presence. "This is it," Evelyn said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "This is what we've been hiding." Louis's face twisted with horror as he backed away. "No, Evelyn, this can't be real. We've buried this. It's over. The past is over." But Evelyn could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. The truth was undeniable now, laid bare before her eyes. The bones of their ancestors, their forgotten family members, and the victims of their greed and ambition had never truly rested. They had been left to haunt the very foundation of the mansion. With a final, resolute breath, Evelyn turned to face her brother. "It's not over, Louis, not until we face what we've done." The mansion seemed too quiet in response, as if recognizing the finality of her words. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The truth had been exposed, and the family's legacy, once built on lies and sacrifice, could no longer stand untouched. Evelyn stepped back, her heart heavy with the burden of everything she had uncovered. Louis stood motionless, his eyes locked on the bones beneath them. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of their family's power. It was a reminder of the price they had paid for it. With that, Evelyn turned away. The mansion would never be the same again. The story of the Charbonnier family is one of ambition, power, and the cost of living in the shadows of the past. For generations, they built their legacy on the remains of those they had wronged, hiding the truth beneath the grand walls of their mansion. It wasn't until Evelyn dared to confront the darkness that the truth came to light. Truths that had been buried, literally and figuratively, for far too long. One of the most powerful lessons in this story is the danger of ignoring the past. The Charbonnier family's refusal to acknowledge the bloodshed and manipulation that paved their path to success created a cycle of guilt and secrecy that ultimately tore them apart. The mansion, once a symbol of power, became a prison of their own making, haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of their choices. The consequences of their actions were inevitable. The past never stays buried for long, and when we fail to confront the darker aspects of our history, it inevitably resurfaces, often in ways we cannot control. The Charbonniers' downfall came not just from external forces, but from the internal rot of their own hidden sins. Another takeaway is the importance of truth. No matter how uncomfortable or painful, Evelyn's journey was not just about uncovering the family's secrets. It was about confronting the uncomfortable truths that had been ignored for too long. Her refusal to turn a blind eye, her determination to seek justice for those who had been silenced, ultimately led to the family's reckoning. Lastly, this story underscores the cost of silence. For years, the Charbonniers thrived by keeping their darkest secrets hidden. But silence only works for so long. Eventually, the truth demands to be heard, and those who have built their lives on lies will have to face the consequences of their choices. The mansion stood as a monument to a family's ambition, but it was also a testament to the consequences of ignoring the truth. Evelyn's journey had shattered the illusion of power and control that the Charbonnier family had so carefully cultivated. The mansion, once a symbol of grandeur, had become a graveyard of secrets, its walls echoing with the whispers of the past. As the dust settled, and the truth finally came to light, the Charbonnier family was left to pick up the pieces of their broken legacy. The mansion would never be the same again, and neither would they. What had once been hidden in the shadows now stood exposed for the world to see. But there is more to this story than just the fall of one family. It is a reminder that no secret remains buried forever. The past, no matter how painful, will always find a way to resurface. And when it does, we must be ready to face it head on. The Charbonnier family's story is not just a cautionary tale, it's a call to action, to confront the truth, to challenge the darkness, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past are never repeated again. What will you do when your own truths come knocking?